They say the most dangerous thing about RV parks isn't the wildlife or the weather or even the people you might meet, it's the illusion of safety. The glow of porch lights, the chatter of families, the smell of coffee drifting from open doors, all of it tells you that you've arrived somewhere familiar, somewhere harmless. But I've learned, after years of traveling this country's roads, that every campground carries its own secret weight. Every tree remembers. Every empty space was empty for a reason. My name's Caleb, I'm 41, and I've spent the better part of a decade documenting life on the road for a small YouTube channel that started out with a simple goal: share the beauty of RV living, the freedom, the simplicity, the sense of belonging, nowhere but everywhere. But over time, the stories changed. What people started sending me weren't tips about the best solar setups or routes for scenic drives. They were warnings. I started getting messages from viewers who'd experienced things they couldn't explain. Strange lights over desert campgrounds, voices coming from dry lakes at night, missing time, animals behaving wrong, laughter when there should have been silence. I didn't believe most of them at first. You may not when your job is to keep things grounded in the real world. But the thing about patterns, they have a way of catching your attention. And when you get 4 emails from different states describing the same sound, the same metal tapping on the roof at exactly 3:12 a.m., you stop shrugging it off. So this story isn't just about one place. It's about your places, the ones you sent me, the ones I see for myself. The first account came from a man in Arizona. He'd parked his fifth wheel near a small family-owned RV park outside of Seligman, just off the old Route 66 corridor. The park looked like any other: gravel pads, a laundry shack, a faded sign promising friendly staff, and starry nights. He said that on his second night, he woke up to the sound of someone walking around his trailer. At first, he thought it was just another camper out late, maybe heading to the bathroom. But when he looked through his window, he saw bare footprints in the dust, fresh, wet prints that stopped halfway around his RV and vanished. I thought it sounded exaggerated, but when I drove there myself, I noticed something I'll never forget. At night, the park was completely still, not even the wind moving the flags. And when I looked down at the gravel, I could see faint impressions. Not footprints exactly, more like something pressed the ground with weight, then erased itself. The owner, an older man named Roy, told me, yeah, people talk about that. Some say it's groundwater shifting, but we ain't had rain in weeks. He smiled when he said it, but it wasn't the kind of smile you return. That same night, around 3 a.m., I heard tapping on my roof. Not hard, just 3 slow knocks. I wanted to believe it was the desert cooling down, the metal contracting. But when I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, I saw something even stranger. Across the park, 3 other RVs had their porch lights flickering in unison. You ever feel a silence so loud it fills your chest? That's what it felt like standing there, knowing something unseen was moving through the camp, not around it. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The second story came from Oregon. A couple in their 60s who'd retired early and bought a Class C RV to travel the Pacific coast. They sent me a voice memo, and you could hear the fear in their voices. They'd stopped at a place called Spruce Creek Camp, a quiet site surrounded by old-growth forest near Tillamook. Everything seemed fine until they noticed a pattern. Each morning when they woke, their chairs were rearranged. The first night, they figured it was raccoons. By the third, they realized someone, or something, had been sitting in them. The seats were still warm. When I visited that park a month later, I brought trail cameras, thinking I'd catch whatever it was. The first 2 nights, nothing. The third night, I woke up to the soft creak of my own camping chair. It was rocking, gently, as if someone had just stood up from it. The footage? Corrupted. Both cameras. Just static, with a faint outline, like heat shimmer, hovering where the chair had been. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, Caleb, maybe you're just reading too much into things, believe me, I used to tell myself the same. But there's a point where coincidence starts to rot. where you smell something underneath the story, something that doesn't fade with sunlight. The third listener account came from a woman named Irene who stayed at an RV park near the Smoky Mountains. Her message was short, just a few lines. Open quote, "They whisper from the laundry room. I thought it was static. Then they said my name." Close quote. When I arrived, the park was almost empty. Half the sites overgrown. The laundry building still stood, door half open, dryer vents full of webs. I set up my camera, turned on the power, and sat there as the machines rumbled to life. Within minutes, a faint voice rose through the hum, like words carried on a different frequency. My own name, spoken clear as day, Caleb. You'd think I'd run, but something in me froze. It wasn't fear, it was familiarity, like whatever was calling had been waiting for me. I packed up and left before dawn, but I didn't delete the recording. When I played it back later, there was nothing but a low, looping hum, a sound almost like breath. Each of these parks looked so ordinary during the day. Families grilling burgers, kids riding bikes between rigs, old couples waving from folding chairs. But at night, it all changed. The world inside the RV walls grew smaller, tighter. You could feel the darkness pressing against the fiberglass. The way carries differently when there's something alive in it. I started thinking about the common thread. Arizona, Oregon, Tennessee, all far apart, all unique in terrain and story, yet somehow connected by one thing: isolation inside community. Surrounded by people, yet utterly alone when the night turns strange. So I began asking myself a dangerous question. What if these encounters weren't coincidences? What if the RV parks we think of as safe havens are built on something older, something inhospitable, that just hides beneath the asphalt and Wi-Fi signals? The pattern wasn't random anymore. Every story I received mentioned sound, knocking, whispering, breathing, as if whatever moves through these places doesn't show itself, it listens first. And once it learns your rhythm, your footsteps, your voice, your heartbeat, it begins to mimic. That's when it's already too late. After that realization, I started digging deeper. I reached back out to my subscribers, people who'd sent stories before, and asked them a simple question. What did you hear before it happened? Some said footsteps. Others said a hum, a whistle, or a knocking that seemed to move inside the RV walls. But the most disturbing responses came from those who described voices, not clear words, but copies of familiar sounds. One woman said she heard her husband's laughter outside their camper, except he was asleep beside her. I began noticing my own patterns too. After each trip, after each park I visited, something lingered in the white noise of my own rig, a faint echo in the vents, the click of the refrigerator turning on in the middle of the night, always followed by the soft scrape of something dragging underneath the floor. I used to record ambient audio for my videos. Crickets, the hum of generators, the soft murmur of wind through trees. But when I played the clips back, there was always a gap. A blank space that lasted 3 to 5 seconds, like something didn't want to be heard. It's strange how paranoia grows in silence. You start noticing the smallest changes, the way your curtains sway even when the AC's off, or how the air feels heavier in the middle of the night. I stopped sleeping through most nights. Instead, I'd sit in the driver's seat of my RV, watching the shapes of other rigs glowing faintly under the moonlight. Windows lit, shadows moving inside. That's when I received the message that would change how I looked at everything. A man named Brett wrote to me about a park in New Mexico, near a place called White Sands Vista, a small, almost forgotten rest area that had been turned into a handful of gravel lots for RV travelers. He said the place looked ordinary from the road, but something about the sand felt alive. Each night, he'd hear rustling under his rig, like someone running their hands through the dust. When he finally looked underneath with a flashlight, there was nothing, just smooth sand, untouched. He left the park after 3 nights, but not before taking a photo of something he found etched into the ground near his tires, a perfect circle drawn by what looked like fingernails. I drove out there 2 weeks later. White Sands Vista wasn't on any official map, but I found it. A slanted gravel lot with 3 RV pads and a small wooden sign half buried in sand. There was no one around. The wind blew fine white dust that coated everything. It got in your mouth, your hair, your lungs. The first night I parked at the far edge and left my windows cracked open, recording audio as usual. Around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like whispering outside, like dry sand shifting, but with rhythm. I didn't move, I just listened. Then it said my name again. Not from one direction, but from all around. It wasn't a whisper this time, it was a breath, like air forced through hollow space. I turned off every light and waited. The whispering stopped, but the sand outside began to rise, tiny mounds lifting and falling as though something beneath was breathing in sync with me. When I exhaled, it did too. When I held my breath, it paused. You know that moment where fear stops being a reaction and becomes a presence? That's what it was. I could feel it learning me. By sunrise, everything looked normal again. But the sand near my RV steps had been disturbed. 5 long finger marks, pressed deep, pointing toward the door. I left before noon. I thought about not telling anyone, not posting it, not even mentioning it on my channel. But silence only feeds the thing that hides behind it. So I made a short video titled "The Places We Don't Park Twice." I didn't mention specifics, but I hinted at the strange similarities between stories from across the country. The comments exploded. One man from Michigan wrote that he'd seen a reflection in his RV window that didn't match his own face. A family from Utah said their generator kept turning on by itself at the same time every night, 3:12 a.m., and when they finally unplugged it, they still heard it running in the distance. It wasn't just me anymore. It was everywhere. The next story I investigated came from North Carolina, near a lakeside park that had closed years ago. A former park ranger named Alina reached out to me personally. She said she'd worked maintenance during her 20s, cleaning up abandoned lots and checking electric hookups for safety. But one night, she was asked to check on a strange light reported by campers at Site 17, a site that didn't exist on the official map. When she arrived, she found a small Airstream trailer parked on a pad surrounded by fog. A single lantern burned inside. She called out, but no one answered. Then she noticed something worse. The ground beneath the trailer was wet. The smell was like copper and earth. She said she backed away slowly, got in her truck, and radioed the office. But when they sent a crew out the next morning, there was no trailer, no pad, no tire marks, just trees, as if the land had healed overnight. When I drove through that same region, I looked for the coordinates she gave me. And when I got there, the GPS on my dash flickered and died. I checked my phone. It was 3:12 a.m. It's funny how that time keeps finding me, no matter where I go. I parked under the pines and turned everything off. No lights, no engine, just silence. For a few minutes, it felt peaceful, the kind of stillness only nature can hold. Then, from the darkness ahead, a glow appeared. It wasn't bright, but it pulsed like a heartbeat, and I swear I could hear the faint sound of someone breathing in sync with that light. I never approached it. I just watched, frozen, until it faded. After that night, I stopped thinking of these as isolated hauntings or coincidences. I started to believe we were dealing with something larger, something that travels with us, maybe even through us. The common thread wasn't the park or the state or the type of RV. It was the travelers themselves. Wherever we go, we bring our ghosts. Some of them just learn to follow the signal. That realization hit hardest when I returned home to edit my recordings. I plugged in my audio drive and the folders began deleting themselves one by one. No error message, no warning, just gone. And when I opened the remaining file, there was only one thing inside, a sound clip. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. Then a voice, mine, saying, "You shouldn't have listened." When I heard that recording, I sat frozen in my seat. You know that moment where reality feels like it's being quietly rearranged around you, like the walls of your RV have shifted by a fraction of an inch, and you can sense it even though you can't see it? That's what it felt like. It wasn't my voice speaking in the clip. Not exactly. The tone was off, slower, heavier, like I'd recorded it underwater. I thought maybe someone had hacked the file, manipulated it somehow, but when I ran the metadata, it said it had been recorded 3 hours before I even got to that park in North Carolina. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even blink much. Every sound felt amplified. The creak of the awning, the rustle of pine needles, the sigh of wind through the vents. But worse was the smell. Metallic, faintly sweet, the same one I'd smelled under that Airstream that wasn't supposed to exist. That's when I started receiving packages. Small manila envelopes, no return address, each one containing a flash drive, a handwritten note, and, always, a photo of an empty RV park. The handwriting was different each time, but the message was always the same. Open quote, they're moving. Don't stay 2 nights in the same place. Close quote. The flash drives held short video clips. Grainy, recorded from dashboard cams or security systems. But every single one ended the same way, with a figure standing just beyond the glow of headlights, face obscured, body perfectly still. Sometimes it looked human. Other times, not quite. I know how this sounds. Trust me, I've spent most of my adult life rationalizing every weird thing that's happened to me. I've blamed bad Wi-Fi, camera glitches, long nights, isolation, but there's a point where logic feels like a thread pulled too tight. It can't hold the weight anymore. So I decided to stop running from it. I'd face it head on. I chose a place intentionally. A small, almost forgotten RV park in Wyoming near the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. A viewer had once told me about it. If you want to understand what's really happening, she'd said, go where the signal dies. It wasn't hard to find. There was no cell reception for 50 miles in any direction. The park sign was so faded you could barely read it. Long, hollow campground. When I arrived, there were only 2 other RVs. Both looked abandoned. Dusty windows, flat tires, no footprints in the gravel. The air was cold enough to bite. I parked beneath a skeletal cottonwood tree, and for the first time in weeks, I turned every light off. No recording gear. No phone. Just me, my rig, and the dark. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke to the faint sound of static. Not coming from the radio, but from outside. It was like a broken transmission playing through the air. The voices weren't clear, but they carried tone, urgent, layered, almost echoing themselves. Then came the tapping. This time, not on the roof. It was underneath the RV. Slow, steady. I crouched down, heart thudding, and pressed my ear to the floor. Something was whispering under me. I grabbed my flashlight, swung open the door, and aimed it beneath the rig. The light caught something. Hands. Pale, ashy hands pressing up through the gravel. Fingertips moving rhythmically, tracing shapes I couldn't make sense of. Then, just as quickly, they retracted. The gravel smoothed itself, leaving no trace. I slammed the door shut and started the engine. The headlights flickered once, then cut out. The power was dead. Everything inside the RV went black. That's when I saw the reflection. In the window behind me, someone standing in the doorway. But when I turned around, there was no one there. Only the faint smell of ozone, sharp and electric. I remember whispering to myself, you're imagining this. It's just exhaustion. It's the dark playing tricks. But the reflection didn't agree. It stayed, watching, breathing in sync with me. I stayed frozen until dawn. And when the light finally returned, I packed up and left without looking back. On the way out, I passed a small wooden post by the road, weathered, almost buried by weeds. Someone had carved into it. Open quote, don't look at yourself at night. Close quote. I didn't understand it then, but now I do, because sometimes what's looking back isn't you. A few weeks later, I was back on the road somewhere in Texas, driving through an endless stretch of desert highway. The air shimmered with heat. My eyes felt heavy from sleepless nights, but I couldn't stop thinking about the voices, the reflections, the whispers that seemed to follow from park to park. That's when my CB radio, something I hadn't used in years, crackled to life. A voice came through, calm, steady, open quote, you've been asking too many questions, Caleb, close quote. I froze. Open quote, who is this, I asked. Close quote, static. Then, open quote, you already met us, close quote. Then silence. The radio never worked again after that. Later that night, I pulled into a roadside rest stop, not a real RV park, just a dirt lot with a few picnic tables and a flickering street lamp. I was too tired to care. I shut the engine off, opened the window, and let the cool desert air spill in. That's when I smelled it again, the metallic, coppery scent. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a voice, right outside the window. My voice. Open quote, "You shouldn't have listened." Close quote. I didn't look. I couldn't. The whisper came closer, brushing against the thin screen between me and whatever was outside. Open quote, "You brought us with you." Close quote. The screen bowed inward as though something invisible pressed its face against it. I backed away, trembling, and reached for the ignition. The engine roared to life, but the headlights revealed nothing. Just sand, wind, and the endless road stretching into blackness. I drove until the sun came up. When I finally stopped, I checked the exterior of the RV. The screen was torn, not slashed, but melted, like someone had breathed heat through it. I don't know how to explain what's happening or why it keeps following me. Maybe these things aren't bound to the parks themselves. Maybe they live in the empty spaces between us. The frequencies, the echoes, the forgotten corners of static we pass through every time we turn the key and drive into the night. Every time I think it's over, I hear it again. The 3 knocks. The whisper in my own voice, the quiet hum that builds until the air itself feels alive. And maybe that's the real warning. Maybe RV parks aren't haunted by ghosts at all. Maybe they're haunted by memory itself, all the energy we leave behind, all the fear that lingers, waiting for someone to listen long enough to wake it up. So if you're listening to this right now, from your rig, your tent, or your little patch of quiet earth somewhere far from town, take my advice. When the night turns strange, don't go outside, don't look for the source, don't answer when you hear your name, and if you hear 3 slow knocks, lock the door, because something out there still remembers you. I've always believed that silence can tell you more than any sound. It's what pulled me into the Hoh rainforest that September, that heavy, breathless quiet that felt almost sacred, like the earth was holding its breath. My name's Evan Marlowe, I'm 37, and I've been traveling across the Pacific Northwest in my old RV for the past 4 months. Some people call it running away. I call it trying to listen. That week, I parked just off the Upper Hoh Road near the campground, close enough to hear the faint rush of the river at night. My father used to bring me out here when I was a kid. He'd walk those same trails, moving through the mist like he was part of it. But one morning when I was 15, he went hiking alone and never came back. No search party found him, not even a boot print or a torn piece of fabric. Just a trail that went on and on until it didn't anymore. Maybe that's why I came back. Not to find him, but to understand what kind of place could take someone like that. The first few days were beautiful, almost unreal. Moss hung from every branch like green lace. The air smelled of wet cedar and rain-soaked soil, and every step on the trail gave off this soft, spongy sound. The forest felt alive, but not in the way people mean when they talk about nature being full of life. It felt aware, like something vast and old was paying attention. At night, when I sat inside the RV, the rain would tap against the roof in uneven rhythms, not quite random. Sometimes I'd wake up and swear I could hear footsteps outside, soft and slow, moving through the gravel. I'd peek through the blinds, flashlight in hand, but the fog was always too thick to see more than a few feet ahead. On the 3rd morning, I decided to hike what the locals called the Vanishing Trail. It wasn't on the official maps, just a narrow offshoot past a fallen log on the Hoh River Trail that some campers said looped back eventually. I'd overheard 2 guys at the visitor center talk about it. One of them said it was beautiful but easy to get turned around. The other just shook his head and said, "Don't follow the quiet part." I didn't know what that meant at the time. By mid-morning, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a fog so thick it looked like smoke. The forest dripped and shimmered in muted light. Every sound was close. The creak of a tree, the squish of my boots, my own breath. The deeper I walked, the more the usual trail markers started to fade. The path narrowed, swallowed by moss and ferns, and yet I kept thinking I saw it continue. A faint track, a depression in the earth, always a few feet farther. I told myself it was fine. I'd marked my GPS, brought extra batteries, and even left a note in the RV just in case. Still, that familiar pull in my stomach, the one I used to get when I thought about my dad, began to stir. It was part fear, part curiosity. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. About an hour in, I came across something that didn't fit, a torn strip of fabric hanging from a branch. It was pale blue, maybe from a jacket or shirt, and old, the edges frayed and dark with moisture. My pulse kicked up. I told myself it could have belonged to anyone. But then I noticed the way it was tied in a small, neat knot. My dad used to tie flags like that when marking trails for me. I laughed nervously to myself. Coincidence. It had to be. The trail descended toward a stream that wound through the forest like silver glass. The water was cold and impossibly clear, but when I looked down into it, I could have sworn I saw movement. Not just the current, but something like the outline of footsteps beneath the surface, fading as the ripples spread. I blinked and they were gone. That's when I realized the forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no dripping leaves, not even wind. I don't know if you've ever stood in a place so quiet it felt like pressure, like the air was heavy in your ears. But it does something to you. It makes you feel watched. I took a step forward, and the sound of it was almost violent in the stillness. Another step, then another. That's when I heard it, a soft, distant whistle, faint, uncertain, like someone trying to call a dog from far away. I froze. It came again, a little closer this time, and I felt something primal rise in me. Not exactly fear, but that deep instinct that tells you something's wrong. I turned around to head back, but the trail behind me wasn't there anymore. At least not the one I remembered. The trees seemed to have shifted, the ferns thicker, the light dimmer. I tried using the GPS, but the screen was blank. No signal, no data, just a static gray map. My chest tightened. I marked a nearby tree with my knife, took a deep breath, and chose the direction that felt right. I'd walked these woods enough to trust my sense of direction. But after 10 minutes, I passed the same tree with the knife mark again. I thought maybe I'd looped without realizing it, but the mark was fresher, as if I'd just made it seconds ago. Something moved in the corner of my eye. A shadow behind a curtain of moss, too tall to be an animal, too still to be human. I lifted my flashlight and the beam caught only mist. The whistle came again, closer now, rising and falling like it was answering my heartbeat. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking slightly. "Is someone there?" No reply, just a long, low sigh that could have been wind or breath. I started walking faster, branches slapping my shoulders, the ground softening beneath my boots. My legs burned, my chest ached, but the forest didn't change. It felt like I was walking inside a loop, the same fallen log, the same leaning cedar, the same puddle reflecting gray sky. My watch said it had been nearly 2 hours, but the light never shifted. I finally stopped, dropped to my knees, and pressed my hand against the earth to steady myself. The ground was trembling, not violently, just faintly, like something was moving deep below. The vibration came and went, pulsing in a slow rhythm, like a heartbeat under the soil. When I looked up, I saw it. A faint trail ahead, glowing slightly, almost phosphorescent in the mist. I thought maybe it was sunlight breaking through, but it wasn't. It pulsed too, in time with that same underground rhythm. Against every rational thought, I followed it. It led me to a clearing surrounded by trees so thick they looked like walls. In the center stood an old wooden post, half rotted and covered in moss. Carved into it were words I could barely make out, "End of path." Only the trail didn't end. Behind the post, it kept going. Deeper, darker, endless. And somewhere down that path, I heard it again. That whistle. This time, it sounded exactly like my father. I don't remember making the decision to move, but suddenly I was walking toward that sound, down the trail that shouldn't have been there. My breath came in short, controlled bursts, not panic yet, but close. The forest on either side felt denser now, almost solid. The air smelled strange too, like rain mixed with something metallic, faintly sweet and wrong, like rusting iron after a storm. The trail narrowed again, the glowing light fading until all I could see was the faint outline of damp soil beneath my boots. I kept thinking, this is how people vanish. My rational mind screamed to turn back, but something stronger kept pulling me forward. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was grief, maybe both. "Dad?" I said softly, feeling stupid the moment the word left my mouth. But the forest answered, not with words, but with a faint echo, a whisper of my own voice returning from somewhere far ahead. The sound came again, but different this time. A low hum beneath the whistle, almost like someone breathing through hollow wood. It shifted in pitch, then faded into the rhythm of dripping water. Every instinct told me to leave. But every step backward made the forest seem to lean closer, like the trees themselves would close the exit if I hesitated. I started marking the trees again, small cuts in the bark, deliberate, spaced every few feet. But after the fifth one, I looked back and saw only 3. I turned again, and now there were 7. It didn't make sense. My hands trembled as I gripped the knife tighter. I was losing track, not just of direction, but of sequence. Then I noticed something strange. The sound of my footsteps wasn't matching anymore. There was a delay, a fraction of a second, like an echo that didn't belong in open air. I stopped. One more step followed mine, a heartbeat later. I froze. So did it. The silence returned, thick and full of pressure. I raised the flashlight again, scanning the trees. Every shape looked human for half a second before dissolving back into branches and moss. But when I turned the light toward the ground, I saw another set of footprints beside mine, fresher, deeper, pressed into the soft mud as if someone was walking exactly in step behind me. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice too loud. The echo came back distorted, overlapping like it was answering through water. Then, just barely audible, I heard it say, "Evan." That's when my chest locked up. I hadn't said my name. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping on a root. The flashlight flickered, and for a moment the world went black. In that darkness, I swear I heard the someone exhaling behind my left shoulder. Slow, patient, almost relieved. When the beam came back on, there was nothing there. I started running. I didn't care where. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop until I reached a clearing. Not the same one as before, but similar enough that my brain refused to trust it. In the center was something new. A structure. It looked like the remains of a wooden shelter, maybe a ranger's outpost or an old hunting shack. The roof had collapsed and moss covered most of the walls. But on one of the beams, someone had carved initials, R.M. My father's name was Richard Marlowe. The edges of my vision swam. I forced myself closer, hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the light. Inside the shelter, I found the remnants of a fire pit filled with wet ash and something half buried, a small tin box, rusted almost shut. I pried it open, expecting maybe old matches or fishing hooks. Instead, inside was a piece of paper, folded and sealed in a plastic sleeve. It was a map, hand-drawn, and at the top, written in faded ink, were the words, "Follow the quiet." That phrase again, the one I'd overheard at the visitor center. I unfolded the map completely. It showed the river, the main trail, and then a faint line that curved off to the side, ending in a circle labeled only X. No distances, no landmarks, but the line twisted and coiled like it was never meant to end. I stared at it for a long time, then glanced back out the doorway. The fog was thicker now, rolling in waves, and the forest around me seemed different. The trees weren't where they had been. The shapes had shifted, subtle but deliberate. I could swear the clearing itself had narrowed, closing in inch by inch. I grabbed the map, stuffed it in my pack, and turned toward what I thought was the way out. My boots sank slightly into the earth, softer than before, spongy, almost warm. The ground pulsed beneath me again, that same rhythm. The whistle came one last time, close, right behind me. I spun around expecting to see someone, but instead I saw myself. Not a reflection, A figure standing in the mist, wearing my jacket, my backpack, moving exactly as I did, but a half second behind, like watching a delayed version of my own motion. Its face was lost in shadow, but I could feel it smiling. My breath shattered into pieces. I backed away, tripping over a root, falling hard onto my shoulder. When I looked up, the figure was gone. Only the fog remained, thick, silent, unmoving. I don't know how long I sat there, time lost all meaning. My watch had stopped completely. The compass spun uselessly in circles. Eventually I stood shaking and began walking again. Not because I thought I knew the way out, but because staying still felt worse. Somewhere behind me, the footsteps started again, slow, matching mine. And then, faintly through the trees, I saw a light, pale and distant, flickering like a lantern. Relief flooded me. Maybe it was a ranger, maybe another camper. I called out, but the light didn't react. It just moved away, deeper into the fog. I followed it. Every step brought me closer until I realized the light wasn't moving forward. It was moving backward, drawing me in. I could see it clearly now, swaying, rhythmic, and I recognized it, my RV's porch light. But the RV was wrong. It sat in the middle of the forest clearing, surrounded by trees that shouldn't have been there. The license plate was half buried in moss. The windows were dark, but I could see my silhouette standing inside, frozen in place, looking out. The sight rooted me where I stood. I wanted to move, to run, to scream, but all I could do was whisper one word, barely audible: no. The porch light flickered once, twice, then went out. And when the darkness took over again, the forest whispered my name, over and over, until it sounded like the rain itself. The whispering didn't stop. It came from everywhere at once, above me, behind me, underneath the soil. My name slipped through the trees in voices that weren't quite human, too stretched, too hollow. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside my head now, reverberating like wind trapped in a bottle. I stumbled toward where the RV had been, but when I reached the clearing again, it was gone. Only the flattened shape of damp earth remained, like something heavy had rested there for years and then lifted. I turned in circles, light from my flashlight cutting through the fog like thin wire. Every direction looked the same, trees arching in patterns that didn't seem possible, bark rippling like water under the beam. My breathing came fast and shallow. Calm down, Evan. Think. The rational part of me fought to surface. I'd gotten lost before. I'd survived storms, snow, even a car breakdown miles from the nearest town. But this wasn't the same. This wasn't weather or fatigue. This was something using my fear as a compass. I pulled out the map again, hoping for something solid, but the lines had changed. The ink had bled outward, forming new paths where none had been before, twisting and splitting like veins. The circle labeled X now pulsed faintly, like the page itself was breathing. I dropped it, and for a second I thought I heard laughter, quiet, thin, childlike, from somewhere deep in the trees. I backed away until I hit something solid. My shoulder collided with bark, but it wasn't rough like it should have been. It was smooth, almost warm, like skin. I turned and found myself staring at a tree that had a shape pressed into its trunk, an imprint of a hand. My hand, fresh, as if I'd placed it there moments ago. That was when the smell hit me. Not the usual earthy rot of forest decay, but something sharper, chemical, like ozone mixed with iron. The fog had taken on a faint red tint, barely noticeable until you realize the air itself looked bruised. My flashlight flickered again, then died. Total darkness. I tried to move, but the ground shifted beneath my feet, softening until I sank up to my ankles in mud that pulsed with that same slow heartbeat. Something brushed my leg, cold, slick, deliberate. I yanked my foot free, stumbling forward, but the forest didn't let me go. Branches snagged my jacket, tearing the fabric, tugging me backward like hands. I tore through them, panting, until I broke into another clearing. At first, I thought I was safe. Then I realized I was standing in front of another RV. Not mine. It was older, much older, covered in moss and vines, windows shattered, the roof partially caved in. But the make and model were identical to mine, down to the faded paint and dented rear bumper. My chest tightened. I moved closer, every step echoing like it was happening inside a dream. The door hung open. I called out, but my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. It came back hollow, delayed. Inside, everything was decayed. The mattress collapsed, cabinets warped from moisture, mildew crawling up the walls. But on the small counter near the sink sat a metal thermos, the same kind my dad used to carry. I reached for it, fingers trembling, and when I lifted it, I saw something carved into the surface. RM. Again, same handwriting, same steady hand. My throat closed. I unscrewed the lid. The faint scent of coffee still lingered, even after all these years. Then I saw it, a reflection in the window across from me. A man standing just behind my shoulder. I turned fast, light shaking wildly. No one there. But the reflection stayed. It was him, my father, or what was left of him. His eyes were gray, hollow, and his face seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. When he reached for me, the reflection's hand pressed against the glass. Only the glass started to bow outward, like it wanted to release him. I dropped the thermos, stumbled back out of the RV, and ran until my lungs burned. My mind refused to form words, only fragments. He's here. He's here. He never left. The forest around me twisted again. Paths branched and rejoined, impossible geometry. I tripped and fell against a rock, my flashlight clattering into the ferns. The beam landed on something pale in the dirt. Bones, not animal. Too long, too clean. Beside them, a rusted metal watch half buried in moss. I brushed it off. It was engraved. RM. I couldn't breathe. The world began to tilt, sounds warping into low groans that seemed to come from the forest itself. I staggered up, clutching the watch, and ran in whatever direction felt opposite of everything else. My only thought was escape. But escape didn't exist. Every direction folded back on itself. Trees shifted when I blinked. The whispering rose into something louder. Layered voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, all murmuring the same thing in different tones. Follow the quiet. Follow the quiet. That phrase again. It didn't feel like a command anymore. It felt like a trap. I covered my ears, yelling to drown them out, and that's when I heard the river. A real sound this time. Rushing water. Constant. Steady. I moved toward it, stumbling through brush until the trees parted, revealing the Ho River's pale current. Relief hit me like air after drowning. I dropped to my knees, tears mixing with the mist. But when I looked upstream, my stomach turned. On the far bank, I saw the same clearing I'd first entered that morning. The same crooked cedar, the same moss-covered log. My RV sat there, perfectly intact, engine idling softly, headlights cutting through the fog. I shouted, waved my arms, but there was no response. The driver's door was open. Someone sat in the seat, me. I watched myself reach forward and turn off the engine. The lights went out. The world dimmed with them. The water at my feet began to shimmer, faint ripples forming words that vanished as soon as I tried to read them. The whispering fell silent again, and in that unbearable silence, I finally understood what follow the quiet meant. The quiet wasn't peace. It was the place where everything ended. The mist rolled closer, thick and white, curling around me like smoke. The last thing I remember before the world dissolved was the faint sound of my father's whistle, carrying me into the fog. When I opened my eyes, it was daylight. Not bright, just that flat gray light you get after a storm, where everything looks washed out and heavy. The fog still hung low, but thinner now, shifting between the trees like steam. For a moment, I thought I dreamed the whole thing. My clothes were soaked, my hands muddy, but my body felt wrong, sore in places I didn't remember falling. I was lying on the side of a trail. Not the trail, but a trail. Dirt packed, footprints visible, faint sound of the river somewhere close. My pack was beside me, half unzipped. My GPS blinked weakly, showing coordinates that meant nothing to me. I tried standing, but the world tilted. My vision pulsed with light spots. I sat again, gripping the nearest tree for balance. The bark was real, rough, cold, solid. A bird called somewhere far off. Actual sound, actual life. Then I saw it, a wooden sign nailed to a post ahead. The lettering was faded but legible. Ho River Trail, 2.3 miles to campground. I don't know if I laughed or cried first. My throat made a sound halfway between both. I'd made it out. Somehow. I pushed myself to my feet and started walking, slow at first. Legs stiff, lungs raw. Every few steps, I turned back just to make sure the forest was still behind me. Still there, not shifting, not bending. But something about it had changed. The air was lighter. Birds moved through the canopy again. The forest looked alive in the ordinary way, sunlight catching on spider silk, the smell of rain and soil. Normal, but normal didn't feel safe anymore. By the time I reached the campground, the place was empty. My RV sat exactly where I'd left it, dew shining on the windshield. I stopped a few feet away, heart pounding. The engine was cold, the porch light off, everything looked untouched. Still, I circled it once before going inside. Habit now. The smell hit me first, that faint mix of coffee, damp clothes, and the cedar air freshener I'd hung weeks ago. It should have been comforting, but instead it made my skin crawl. The space felt smaller than before, like the walls had inched inward. On the small table by the bed was the tin box I'd found in the forest, the same one with my father's map. Only now, when I opened it, the paper inside was blank. No ink, no marks, no follow the quiet. Just a clean, empty page, damp at the edges. I sat down and stared at it until my vision blurred. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I'd blacked out in the storm, hallucinated it all. But then my hand brushed something cold in my jacket pocket. The watch. The one engraved RM. I turned it over in my palm. The hands had stopped, permanently frozen at 7:14. That was about the time the fog had swallowed me the night before. My stomach tightened. I set it on the table and stepped outside to breathe. The forest stood still, quiet in the normal way now. A crow croaked in the distance. The smell of wet pine drifted through the air. I could almost convince myself everything was fine, except for one thing. The trees near my RV were marked. Not by rangers, not by accident, by me. Fresh knife cuts, shallow but deliberate, leading away into the forest like a trail I didn't remember making. The marks curved and twisted, vanishing into the mist at the edge of the clearing. I told myself not to follow. I told myself I'd done enough, seen enough. But curiosity, that same awful pull that had brought me here, gnawed at the edges of my reason. What if the forest had let me out only halfway? What if part of me was still lost in there, walking those same endless loops? I stared at those marks for a long time until the light began to fade again. Then I locked the RV, pulled the curtains, and sat on the floor, back to the wall, listening. Hours passed. The rain started up again, gentle at first, then steady. Tap, tap, tap against the roof, random and comforting. I tried to count the beats to make them make sense, but they weren't random anymore. They were in rhythm. 17, 14, 7:14. I grabbed my flashlight, heart racing. I opened the curtain just a crack. The fog had returned, swallowing the edges of the trees. The trail of knife marks was gone. In their place were footprints, bare, wet, leading straight to my door. For a long time I didn't move. I just listened. Then came the whistle, soft, slow, and unmistakable. I froze. It wasn't out in the woods anymore. It was coming from behind me, inside the RV. My flashlight beam shook as I turned. The sound stopped. The air grew dense, heavy, charged with something electric. I could feel it, that same presence pressing against the air, bending it around me. The shadows along the walls seemed to breathe. Then I saw it, my reflection in the narrow window of the RV door. Only it didn't move when I did. It was delayed, just like before, lips parting a second after mine, eyes darker, deeper. "Follow the quiet," it mouthed. The lights flickered, and for a moment I saw past the reflection, into something else, a forest with no sky, no end, just mist and echo and the faint shape of my father walking ahead. Then darkness. I woke up hours later, slumped on the floor, dawn light bleeding through the blinds. The door was closed. Everything was still. The footprints outside had vanished with the night. I didn't stay long after that. By sunrise, I was driving south, out of the Olympic range, following roads that felt too narrow, too human. Every turn of the wheels felt like distance I needed between myself and whatever that place was. But here's the thing. I've been driving for hours now, and every road sign I pass still says Ho Rainforest, 5 miles ahead. And the mist, it's back, hanging low, thickening across the road like it's waiting for me to stop. Sometimes I think I can hear it again through the hum of the tires, that faint whistle winding through the air vents, threading into the silence between my thoughts. I know I should keep going. I know I should ignore it. But the quiet's getting louder, and I think it's trying to lead me home. There are places in America where the trees remember what people forget. Places where the air doesn't just move, it listens. I learned that one autumn night, deep in the Black Hills National Forest of South Dakota, when the silence outside my RV began to breathe. My name's Evan Rourke, 46 years old, born and raised in northern Montana. I've spent the last 5 years living out of a converted 2015 Winnebago Travato, documenting RV life across the country. My goal had always been simple: freedom, solitude, maybe a few good stories to tell. But when I started hearing about haunted forests scattered across the national park system, real, recorded encounters that rangers refused to speak about, I knew I had to see for myself what was hiding behind those timberlines. It started as research for a small video project, nothing more than a ghost tourism piece for my channel, something lighthearted, haunted trails, abandoned cabins, a bit of folklore. But when you've driven as many miles as I have, you learn the weight of silence. You can tell when a place doesn't want to be filmed. The Black Hills were my first stop. I parked my RV at a primitive site off Forest Road 284, a clearing surrounded by ponderosa pines that leaned in too close. No cell signal, no other campers, just the rhythmic hum of the generator and the low hiss of the wind sliding through the needles. I remember stepping out that first night with my headlamp sweeping over the clearing. The temperature dropped faster than I expected, and the smell, wet bark, something faintly metallic beneath it, made the air taste like pennies. I told myself it was the soil, or maybe an old fire pit rusting nearby. The first strange thing was small, a tapping on the RV door, 3 deliberate knocks, right around midnight. I froze, halfway through editing a clip. I thought maybe it was a branch or the wind pushing something loose. But then it happened again, slower this time and closer to the handle. When I opened the door, the clearing was empty. The forest didn't move. My headlamp beam caught nothing but dark timber, and for a moment, I swore I saw a shape between the trees, a pale outline, tall, wrong in the shoulders. Then it vanished with the blink of the light. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every forest sound became amplified, the whine of insects, the distant cracking of branches, even the whisper of the wind through the seams of my van. My mind told me I was overreacting, that isolation was just exaggerating my instincts. But something inside me, the part of me that had hiked Glacier alone, crossed Nevada deserts without a map, told me to leave before sunrise. I didn't. Instead, I started recording. By morning, the tapping had stopped, but in its place was something worse. Footprints. Dozens of them. Bare feet. They circled the RV like something had been pacing through the night, just out of reach of the light. I took photos, mud prints, elongated toes, and when I reviewed them on my laptop, the digital clock in the corner of each frame had frozen. 2:17 a.m. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a campfire story. Later that day, I drove to a ranger station near Pactola Lake, about 40 minutes away. The ranger on duty, a woman in her late 50s named Ruth, listened to my account in silence. She didn't laugh. She didn't even look surprised. When I showed her the photos, she pushed them back across the counter and said quietly, "You're not the first." Apparently, several campers had reported the same phenomena over the years. Knocks, pacing, voices outside their trailers. Once, even an entire Class C motorhome had been found abandoned, its side door hanging open, all possessions left inside. No signs of struggle. Just gone. When I asked what they thought it was, Ruth hesitated, then said something I'll never forget. The Lakota people believe the forest can remember you, sometimes too well. If it wants you to stay, you'll hear it calling by name. That night, curiosity overpowered fear. I went back. I don't know why. Maybe it was arrogance, thinking I could document what others couldn't. Or maybe it was the same draw that keeps people climbing dangerous peaks, to understand what lives beyond reason. I parked in the same clearing, shut off the engine, and let the night settle in like a slow tide. The forest was louder this time. The pines creaked in the wind like ribs under pressure. I could hear something distant, like a low hum or chanting, but every time I turned my head, it faded. Around 2 a.m., the generator sputtered and died, and I knew this was the moment I'd been waiting for. Outside, the air was heavy. The metallic smell had returned, stronger now, almost like blood in the rain. I stepped out with my camera rolling, the red light blinking against the trees. My breath fogged in front of me, and that's when I heard it, my own voice somewhere in the woods, whispering my name. Evan. I froze. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't playback. It came from the direction of the creek about 30 yards away. I swung the camera around, but the lens caught only darkness. My heart hammered. I whispered, "Who's there?" The voice answered. Not as me this time. Not human at all. It said, "Stay." Then the forest erupted, branches snapping, something heavy moving fast through the underbrush. I ran back to the RV, slammed the door, and hit the ignition. The engine coughed but didn't catch. The headlights flickered once, twice, then died completely. I don't remember falling asleep, but at dawn I woke to silence and light streaming through the window. The forest looked normal again, birds, breeze, sunlight, but when I checked the footage, 3 hours were missing. The file jumped from 2:17 a.m. to sunrise, and at the end of the recording, right before it cuts out, I could see something standing behind the trees, tall, pale, featureless, watching. I left the Black Hills that morning, but the feeling didn't leave me. Because the truth is, once you've heard your own voice whisper back from the dark, you stop believing that sound has a single source. That experience sent me down a new road, a kind of obsession. Over the next few months, I drove through Oregon's Umpqua National Forest, Utah's Manti La Salle, Arizona's Coconino, all places rumored to carry strange echoes, vanishing hikers, voices in the pines. And though each forest had its own story, its own brand of darkness, there was one thing they all shared: a silence that followed you home. But the worst came later, when I crossed into Washington and camped in the Olympic National Forest, a place locals called the Whispering Range. That was where the line between fear and madness finally blurred. I remember the drive into Olympic like crossing into a different world. The mist started 20 miles before the boundary line and didn't lift once. The forest there doesn't just grow, it consumes. The trees tower so high they block the sky, and every sound, your footsteps, your breath, gets swallowed before it can echo. I parked near a decommissioned trailhead off Highway 101, an old logging route that barely existed anymore. My RV sat wedged between two moss-covered trunks, the canopy so dense that even at noon it looked like twilight. The forest floor was carpeted in ferns that whispered when the wind touched them. It felt like stepping into the lungs of something alive. That first night, I tried to record an introduction for my video. I spoke into the camera, explaining where I was, the legends surrounding the place, phantom lights, disappearances, a woman seen walking barefoot along the ridges before vanishing at dawn. But midway through filming, I heard something faint on playback, a whisper. Not my own. When I slowed it down, it said, "Don't film us." I shut the camera off and sat in silence for a long time, feeling the pulse in my neck hammer like it wanted out. I told myself it was pareidolia, auditory illusion. But when the wind shifted, I could hear it again, faint but real. A murmur threading through the pines like breath over glass. By midnight, fog rolled in so thick I couldn't see 10 feet from the window. The air was colder than it should have been for summer, damp and sharp like the inside of a cave. I decided to turn in early. Around 3 a.m., I woke to knocking again, the same rhythm as before. 3 sharp taps, pause, 2 more. But this time it came from the roof. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. It moved slowly across the metal shell of the RV, from the back toward the windshield, one deliberate step at a time. Then silence. Then the sound of something dragging down the side. When I dared to look outside, there was nothing, just fog. But the condensation on the window, someone or something, had traced a handprint there. Long fingers, too long. At dawn, I followed the trail leading into the forest. The mist clung low to the ground, curling around my boots like smoke. About half a mile in, I found an old wooden sign nailed to a stump, the letters almost worn away by rain. No overnight camping beyond this point. Beneath it, someone had scratched into the wood. They walk here. The deeper I went, the stranger it became. Birdsong stopped, no wind, just the sound of dripping water like the forest was sweating. I found remnants of old campsites, rusted coffee tins, shredded tarps, one folding chair half buried in moss. I filmed everything, my hands shaking slightly, though I didn't realize it until I saw the footage later. At one point, I thought I saw movement, something tall and white between the trunks, but when I blinked, it was gone. I laughed to calm myself, but the sound didn't come out right. It sounded off-pitch, like it was being mimicked. When I returned to camp, something was different. My RV door was open. I knew I'd locked it. The steps leading up were wet, though it hadn't rained. Inside, the air smelled wrong, sweet like decaying fruit. My camera gear had been moved. The tripod stood facing the bed. On the mattress lay a single pine cone, fresh, green, still sticky with sap. It sounds small, meaningless, but in that moment, I felt like the forest had acknowledged me, answered me. I packed my things that night, deciding to leave before dark. But as I started the ignition, the headlights flickered, revealing shapes in the fog, 5, maybe 6 figures, standing perfectly still between the trees. No faces, no movement. I revved the engine and drove. The road wound back toward the main highway, but after 15 minutes, I passed the same fallen tree I'd seen on the way in. Then again, and again, I was looping. Every turn led back to the same spot, the same bent sign, the same moss-covered stump. It was like the forest had folded in on itself, trapping me in its throat. I tried turning off the GPS, then on again. No signal. Compass spinning. By the 4th loop, the fog turned black. It sounds impossible, but it's true. The mist darkened like ink spreading in water until it was thicker than night. I could feel static in my teeth, taste copper in the air. And then just as my panic hit its peak, I saw lights ahead. Warm, yellow, human. Cabin lights. I pulled over, heart racing. Relief hit like a drug. I stepped out, calling into the dark. Is someone there? No answer. The lights stayed still. I walked closer. The ground squelched under my boots, soft and warm, like stepping on sponge. As I neared, I realized the light wasn't from windows. It was hanging in the air, suspended like lanterns with no strings. And beneath them, shapes moved, slow, deliberate. Their bodies seemed to shimmer as if made of fog wearing human outlines. They turned toward me, and though I couldn't see faces, I felt recognition, like looking into versions of myself that had stayed behind. That's when I heard it again from all directions. Stay. I ran. Branches whipped my face. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the forest itself wanted to drag me down. My flashlight flickered, then died, leaving only the pale glow of my RV through the fog. I dove inside, slammed the door, and drove without thinking, following instinct instead of roads. I don't remember how long I drove, 10 minutes, maybe an hour. But when the fog finally thinned, I was back on Highway 101, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I stopped to breathe, I realized the radio was on, though I hadn't touched it. A faint voice whispered through static, repeating something over and over. National forests keep what's left behind. I killed the engine. The silence afterward was unbearable. I didn't film again for weeks. I couldn't. The footage from Olympic was corrupted. Black frames, distorted sound, and one clear whisper at the end. Next time, bring light. That line haunted me more than the voices, more than the shapes. It made me realize that maybe the forest wasn't just echoing me, it was learning, studying, testing boundaries, and maybe I'd passed or failed. Months later, when I finally returned to civilization, I started looking up other reports, disappearances, unmarked campsites, even ranger logs redacted by the U.S. Forest Service. I found a pattern. The Black Hills, Umpqua, Olympic. They weren't random. They formed a crescent shape across the country, each site located near ancient burn scars, areas where entire forests had once been wiped out by fire and regrown over the ashes. And that's when a terrible thought took root. Maybe the forests aren't haunted because of the dead people buried in them. Maybe they're haunted because something survived the burning, something that remembers fire and fears light. After Olympic, I swore I was done. I told myself no more haunted places, no more cursed coordinates, no more nights spent listening for footsteps that shouldn't exist. But curiosity, once awakened, doesn't die. It festers. It keeps whispering when the world gets quiet. So, when I started hearing stories about Chattahoochee National Forest in northern Georgia, about campers waking up miles from where they'd parked, about laughter coming from inside the trees, I found myself heading east. I told myself it was just to verify the rumors, to finish what I'd started. But deep down, I knew it was something else. I wanted to confront whatever had followed me. By then, my RV had become less of a home and more of a shield, a thin wall of metal and glass between me and whatever waited beyond the tree line. I parked near Lake Conasauga, the kind of place that looks idyllic in daylight. The air was warm, thick with the scent of pine resin and wildflowers. But as the sun sank, that same sweetness turned sour, like something rotting beneath the beauty. Locals had told me about the Echo Hollow, a narrow valley where voices repeat long after you stop speaking. They said sometimes those echoes say things you never said. That night, I set up a microphone outside my RV to record ambient sound. I wanted proof, something I could analyze, maybe even debunk. Around midnight, the forest grew unnaturally still, the kind of silence that hums where you can hear your heartbeat echo in your skull. I whispered into the recorder, "Is anyone here?" No answer. Just the low hum of the woods. Then faintly from far away, my voice repeated, slowed, distorted, "Is anyone here?" The echo shouldn't have been possible. I was miles from any canyon or cliff face. Still, I convinced myself it was a trick of acoustics, until it spoke again. Evan Rourke, it used my full name. I hadn't said that. Something about hearing your name from an invisible mouth breaks you in a way nothing else can. I ran inside, shut the door, turned on every light. The RV glowed like a lantern in the dark, and I waited. I don't know how long, maybe hours. Then I saw them, 3 figures standing just beyond the clearing. Their silhouettes were vague, but wrong. Too thin, too long. One of them tilted its head the way a bird does, like it was studying me. When I moved toward the window, they moved closer. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it out. They weren't there. The beam caught only the glint of wet leaves and the silver line of fog curling low to the ground. But when I turned the light off, they returned, just shadows now, barely visible, like the darkness itself had molded into shape. I don't remember falling asleep. I must have blacked out from fear. But at dawn, I woke to the smell of smoke. Outside, the air shimmered with heat, though no fire burned nearby. The trees were damp with dew, and yet the ground under my RV was warm, too warm. When I crouched down to check, the soil steamed faintly as if something smoldered beneath. And then I saw it. A circle burned into the ground around my RV, perfect and unbroken. I didn't wait. I drove. Didn't care about direction, didn't look back. But as I merged the nearest highway, I saw something that still makes my skin crawl. In the reflection of the side mirror, standing at the forest's edge, were the same figures, still watching, motionless, as if they'd been waiting for me to leave. When I finally stopped for gas 2 hours later, I checked under the RV, half expecting to find scorch marks or melted cables. Instead, I found pine needles fused into the metal, like they'd been pressed there by heat. That night, I couldn't shake the thought. Maybe these forests weren't just haunted. They were connected. The knocking in the Black Hills, the voices in Olympic, the warmth in Chattahoochee, each place a different symptom of the same disease. I started mapping the locations of reported haunted forests across the country, every one of them aligned near ancient trade routes, footpaths used centuries ago by indigenous tribes, routes that later became migration trails, then forgotten logging roads. They all shared something else too. Fire scars beneath new growth, hidden layers of charcoal in the soil. It was as if something had once burned its way through America and left ghosts in the ash. I remember sitting in my RV that night, looking at the glowing map on my laptop. The line of forests curved across the country like a wound that never healed. And at the center of that line, deep in the Ouachita National Forest of Arkansas, sat a stretch of land called Whisper Ridge, a place with no recorded campsites, no ranger outposts, no official trails. Just an expanse of wilderness. That's where I'm headed now. I tell myself it's to find closure, to finally understand what this connection means. But part of me knows I'm chasing the thing that's been chasing me. Every mile feels heavier. The forest seems to know I'm coming. Tonight, I've parked on the edge of the Ouachita Range. The trees here are darker than anywhere else I've seen, like they've absorbed the night instead of reflecting it. The air hums faintly, a low vibration that I can feel in my bones. I haven't even stepped out yet, and already I feel watched. I told myself I'd record one last message before going in, just in case something happens. My name is Evan Rourke, and if anyone finds this recording, know this. The haunted forests of America aren't haunted by the dead. They're haunted by memory. The land remembers every scream, every fire, every person who vanished without a trace. And sometimes it remembers in detail too sharp to fade. If I don't come back, don't look for me in the forest. Look in the fog, listen for the echoes, because sometimes I think the trees don't want us gone. They just want us to join them. Tomorrow I'll drive into Whisper Ridge, and if the knocking starts again, I'll open the door this time. I need to see what's been waiting. I reached Whisper Ridge just before sunset when the light was dying, but the forest hadn't yet claimed the sky. The road ended in a wall of brush, and beyond that, an ancient dirt path wound uphill to a canopy that looked almost black. The air was thicker here, humid, electric, like standing too close to a storm. I killed the engine and sat still for a moment, letting the silence settle. Even the usual forest sounds, crickets, birds, the rustle of leaves, were absent. It was a vacuum of sound so deep it pressed against my eardrums. I don't know how to describe what it feels like to enter a silence that powerful. It's not peaceful. It's suffocating. Like the air itself is listening, waiting for you to make the first mistake. I stepped out of the RV. My boots sank slightly into the earth, soft and warm, like the forest floor had a pulse. The trees here were old, their bark furrowed deep and damp. Some leaned inward, curved unnaturally, as if drawn toward the same invisible point. That's when I realized. They were all bending toward the center of the ridge. I followed the direction of their tilt, hiking deeper with my flashlight, sweeping through the mist. Every few steps, I'd catch glimpses of movement in my periphery, shadows darting between trunks, too quick to focus on. But the worst part wasn't what I saw. It was what I heard. Whispers. Low, layered, thousands of voices overlapping so softly it sounded like leaves rustling, except there was no wind. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and kept walking. After maybe 20 minutes, the trail opened into a clearing. The trees here stood wider apart, forming a rough circle. In the center was a pit, an old fire ring made of stone, long since cold. Around it, scattered in the soil, were metal fragments, bits of melted aluminum, hinges, pieces of something that looked disturbingly like an RV door handle. I crouched, running my fingers through the ash. It was warm, fresh. A sound broke the stillness. 3 knocks. Not on metal this time, on wood. I turned slowly. One of the trees at the edge of the clearing had a hollow split in its trunk, black and gaping. The knocking came again, from inside it. My mind split in 2 directions, one half frozen in disbelief, the other whispering that I needed to leave now. But curiosity overruled fear. I took one step closer, then another, until the hollow filled my vision. When I shined the flashlight into it, the beam reflected off something wet and pale. It wasn't wood. It was skin. Something inside the tree shifted, pressing outward from the bark, and I realized the wood wasn't hollow. It was grown around something shaped like a human face. The bark cracked. A faint breath escaped. and in a voice that was both familiar and wrong, it whispered, "Evan." I stumbled backward, tripping over roots. My flashlight fell, beam rolling wildly across the clearing, and that's when I saw them. Figures emerging from between the trees, dozens of them. Their forms vague but human enough to break me. They didn't walk. They slid. Their bodies moved like smoke given shape, and their faces were smooth, unfinished, as though the forest hadn't yet decided what to make of them. They circled the clearing, their whispering growing louder, overlapping into a rhythm that pulsed with the beat of my heart. Then they stopped all at once. Silence again. One of them stepped forward, head tilting, and when it spoke, every voice I'd ever recorded echoed from its mouth. My own voice from the Black Hills, Ruth the Ranger, the distorted whispers from Olympic, even the recording from Chattahoochee. All of them layered together, saying one word, return. I realized then they weren't haunting the forests. They were the forests, or what the forests had become. Everything that burned, everything that died here had been absorbed. People, voices, memories, even the echoes of fire itself. And somehow, through my recordings, I'd given it a path back. The trees began to move, not swaying, but breathing. The entire ridge seemed to exhale, windless but heavy. The mist thickened, glowing faintly from within, and I felt it brush against my skin like damp fingers. My flashlight flickered. The voice came again, closer now. You listened. Now we remember. The ground shifted beneath me. Roots, slick and cold, coiled around my ankles. I tried to pull free, but they tightened, dragging me toward the center pit. My flashlight spun out of reach, and in the last strobe of its dying light, I saw that the pit wasn't filled with soil at all. It was filled with faces. Hundreds of them, pressed into the dirt like fossils, eyes open, mouths agape, some still breathing, some whispering. I screamed. The forest screamed back. Then, light. A flash so bright it seared the mist away. So sudden I felt my vision collapse into white. I thought it was the end. But when my senses returned, I was back inside the RV, engine running, headlights cutting through an empty road. My camera lay on the passenger seat, recording. I don't remember driving. I don't remember escaping. But I looked down at my hands and saw ash under my nails. When I replayed the footage later, the final clip showed the clearing empty now, the trees no longer bent, the pit gone. But at the end of the video, the camera panned down by itself, focusing on the RV door. 3 knocks, then silence. I've been on the move ever since, never staying in one place more than a night. But no matter where I park, the forests find me. Even in deserts, I can feel it. The smell of moss, the faint hum beneath the ground, the soft knock just before dawn. I used to think I was documenting haunted places. Now I understand. I was documenting a migration. Something old is spreading again. It remembers the shape of us, the sound of our engines, the warmth of our fires. It moves through the roots, the wind, the soil, learning, adapting. And every time someone camps alone and listens too long to the night, it gets closer. If you're hearing my voice, don't go looking for haunted forests. Don't chase the stories or follow the whispers, because once the forest knows your name, it never stops calling. And when you finally answer, it won't let you leave. So tonight, if you're camping beneath the trees and you hear 3 knocks on your door, don't open it, no matter how familiar the voice sounds when it says your name, because it isn't me. My name's Eli Carter, 43 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life drifting between campgrounds across the western states. I started doing it after my divorce, not out of adventure, but out of escape. A way to find stillness in the hum of the wind through pine and the whisper of rivers that didn't ask me to explain myself. I'd been through plenty of places where silence felt like peace. But that fall, when I parked my old white RV near the base of the Three Sisters Mountains in Oregon, I learned that silence can also have a pulse, one that beats with something watching. The campground was a small, half-forgotten Forest Service site, about 20 miles past Sisters, Oregon. Late season, most folks were gone. A few faded camp-closed-for-season signs hung crooked near the trailhead, but the gate was open, so I rolled in anyway. The air was colder than I expected, dry and sharp, carrying the clean smell of snowmelt and old ash. I'd read somewhere that the three sisters, Faith, Hope, and Charity, were named by settlers who thought the mountains looked gentle and protective, but up close, their ridgelines didn't look kind. They looked ancient, like faces that had watched 1,000 years of mistakes repeat themselves. I set up camp by a narrow creek that cut behind the tree line. The sound of it running over stone gave me comfort. I'd been dealing with insomnia for months, and there was something about the endless, steady rhythm of water that made me feel less alone. I spent that first day hiking the lower trails, picking through the remains of old fire rings, and making sure the RV's propane was still holding up for the cold nights ahead. By sundown, a strange hush settled over the valley. Not the quiet of nature, but the kind that feels deliberate, like everything else has agreed to pause. The last light caught on the peaks, turning them blood orange before dropping into gray. Then the wind shifted. It came down from the ridgeline with a faint hollow sound, almost like a voice carried through a tunnel. I told myself it was just air moving through stone. The mind finds patterns in chaos when it's alone too long. Around midnight, I woke to a soft tapping, not on the RV, but just beyond it, on the passenger side, near where the water hose connected. 3 distinct knocks. Then nothing. I sat up, listening, every nerve lit. When I opened the window shade, the trees stood absolutely still. No movement, no wind. I stepped outside with a flashlight and scanned the clearing. My breath came out in short, white bursts. The light caught nothing but frost forming on the grass. The sound had come from close, 10, maybe 15 feet away. I waited, straining my ears until the cold forced me back in. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd dreamt it. That's how loneliness works. It makes you second-guess your own senses. I packed a small day bag and headed up the Broken Top Trail, which led toward the base of the North Sister. The forest there was thick with lichen-covered firs, the kind that dripped even when it hadn't rained in days. I walked for hours, half hoping to find signs of another camper, but the trails were empty. Just me, the sound of boots on frozen ground, and a sky that felt too big. Sometime around mid-afternoon, I found something odd, an old campsite, half buried under pine needles. The ring of stones still blackened, the remains of a tent post snapped in two. And there, nailed to a tree just beyond it, was a rusted license plate, Oregon tag, faded to a dull green. It had a name etched into it with what looked like a knife. Mara, 2014. I stared at it for a long time. That name hit something in me I couldn't explain. Maybe because I'd met a woman named Mara once, years ago, who told me the forest never forgets anyone who dies in silence. The wind came again, sudden and cold. This time it carried a smell, not of decay, but of burnt hair. I backed away, scanning the trees, half expecting to see someone standing there. The forest was empty, but the sound of the creek below seemed different, muffled somehow, as if the trees themselves were swallowing the noise. When I got back to camp near dusk, there were footprints in the frost, not mine, and not fresh enough to tell direction. Bare feet, human-sized, leading toward the RV and then vanishing halfway to the creek. I stared at them for a long time, my pulse in my throat. They weren't deep, but they had weight. Whoever left them wasn't floating. That night, I locked every door and left the flashlight on. The air was so still that even my breathing sounded too loud. Then, just before 2 a.m., I heard it again. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. I froze, heart hammering, every instinct screaming not to move. The sound came again, closer this time, as if something was brushing against the RV's side panel. Then came a voice, faint, whisper thin. It said my name. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat there with the flashlight clenched in my hand, waiting for something else, but nothing came. When dawn finally broke, the frost on the windows had a pattern, swirling loops and shapes, almost like handwriting. I traced one of them with my finger. The mark smeared under the warmth of my skin, thirst, but I could still make out the letters, E-L-I. I left the RV that morning with the sick certainty that I wasn't alone out there. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen, Every step into the woods felt watched, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. That's the strange thing about fear. Once you've felt it take root in a place, it doesn't just push you away. It pulls you deeper, whispering that there's something you need to understand before you go. By noon, I found the creek again and followed it upstream. The water was clearer than glass, shallow, and fast. After about half a mile, I saw a small rock cairn stacked neatly on the bank, 3 stones, perfectly balanced. Beside it, pressed into the mud, were more footprints, bare, small, like a woman's. I crouched, feeling the mud, still cold but pliable, meaning it had been made maybe an hour earlier. I called out, "Hello?" My voice came back wrong, bent by the trees, sounding like it came from somewhere else. That was when I saw the reflection. In the creek just to my right, a shape moved where there shouldn't have been one. A face, pale and indistinct, looking up through the water. Its eyes were open, black as obsidian, and its mouth was moving, though no sound came. My body locked up. I stumbled backward, falling against a log, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thin. When I looked again, the face was gone. Only the current rippling where it had been. I ran back to camp, heart pounding, tripping over roots, not daring to look behind me. But when I reached the RV, the door was open. I was sure I'd locked it. Inside, everything looked untouched, except for one thing. On the small counter by the sink, there was a single wet handprint, small and delicate, fingers splayed wide. It was fading slowly, dripping water onto the counter's edge. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it. My mind was a mess of denial and reasoning, maybe condensation, maybe my own hand from earlier. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. And for the first time since arriving, I realized I might not be the one discovering this place. Maybe something in those mountains had been waiting for me. I didn't leave that day. I should have. I knew that even then. But curiosity has a strange way of camouflaging fear. You start telling yourself you're investigating, that you're in control. In reality, you're just standing still while something larger circles closer. By afternoon, the sky had turned a deep gray, the kind that presses low against the peaks. A storm was rolling in from the west, snow flurries twisting like ash in the wind. I decided to stay one more night, just to see if I could make sense of what was happening. Maybe there were squatters out here. Maybe some local playing games with late-season campers. But when I followed the prints again, those bare, narrow tracks that wound toward the creek, they ended abruptly at the same cairn I'd seen before. 3 stones, perfectly balanced. I kicked one over, half out of anger, half out of defiance. The moment it hit the ground, the wind stopped. Everything froze, the trees, the air, the sound of water. And in that silence, I heard something faint and low, almost a hum, deep enough to feel in my chest. It came from beneath the earth, like the mountain itself was breathing. That night, I tried to keep myself busy. I made a fire, cooked a small meal, even turned on the radio to break the silence, but every station was static. The hum from earlier stayed with me, not in sound, but in sensation. A vibration through the soles of my boots, through the RV floor, like a warning. At around 10, I saw movement through the window, a flicker of light weaving between the trees. A lantern, maybe 100 yards out. I turned off the cabin lights and stepped outside. The air was sharp and metallic, full of static. The light moved slowly, steady, as if someone were walking a trail I couldn't see. Then it stopped. I called out again. "Hello? You need help?" The light didn't move. I took a few steps forward and the air changed. The sound of my boots crunching on frost seemed swallowed before it reached my ears. Then the lantern flared bright, and for a second I saw her. She stood beside a tree, wearing something pale, maybe a dress, though it looked more like torn cloth. Her head was tilted down, hair went hanging over her face. She was barefoot. I blinked, and she was gone. The light, the shape, all of it. The forest snapped back into sound. When I returned to the RV, something was burning. Not wood. Plastic. The smell was sharp and toxic. I rushed inside, heart slamming, and found the stove off, but smoke rising from the small table where my journal sat open. The edges of the pages were blackened, curling inward. Only one page burned completely through, the one where I'd written about finding the name Mara. That was when I knew this wasn't random. Whoever, whatever she was, she didn't want to be remembered that way. I didn't sleep that night or the one after. The knocks continued, sometimes faint, sometimes violent enough to rattle the side panels. Always 3 of them, always from a different spot. I started hearing whispers in the white noise of the wind, fragments of words I couldn't understand. Sometimes they sounded like pleading, other times like laughter. On the 3rd night, the knocking came from the roof. Slow, deliberate. I froze, then grabbed my flashlight and climbed up through the emergency hatch, shaking so hard I nearly dropped the light. The roof was empty, but the frost had been disturbed. Handprints smeared across the metal in long arcs like someone had been crawling. When I climbed down, something inside me shifted. The fear wasn't sharp anymore. It was heavy, resigned. I realized I wasn't dealing with something trying to hurt me. It was trying to be seen. And somewhere in that twisted understanding, I felt pity. The next morning, I drove into the nearest town, Sisters, to find someone who knew the area. At a small diner, I met an older man named Walt, who'd been a ranger before retiring. When I told him where I was camped, his face went pale. "You're by the North Trailhead?" he asked. "Near the creek?" "Yeah. Why?" He rubbed his chin, staring past me like he was watching something far away. "There was a woman, Mara Hill, used to camp out there every summer, alone, local artist, bit of a loner, disappeared in 2014. They found her RV abandoned, same place you're parked now. Door open, no sign of struggle, just gone. They searched for weeks. Locals said the sisters took her." "The sisters?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Old legend. Natives said the mountains were alive, 3 spirits watching over the valley. If you disrespected them, took what wasn't offered, they'd follow you in the wind until you listened." He leaned closer. "Some people say they still do. That night, I thought about leaving, but I couldn't. I needed to know what she'd seen. Or maybe I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it the way she did. I drove back before dusk, parked in the same spot, and waited. The air that night was colder than ever, thick with mist. The creek was louder, almost agitated, and the hum beneath the earth had grown stronger, a constant tremor in my bones. I sat by the window, flashlight in hand, watching the fog move through the trees like smoke. Hours passed. Then I saw her again. This time she was standing by the creek, half shrouded in mist, staring straight at the RV. Her reflection rippled in the black water at her feet. I stepped outside before I could stop myself, the cold biting instantly through my clothes. "Mara?" I said quietly. The name felt wrong on my tongue, like a trespass. She tilted her head, and for the first time I saw her face. Pale, hollowed, eyes dark as the water. There was sorrow there. Deep, endless sorrow. She lifted one hand, pointing toward the mountain. Then the mist closed around her, and she was gone. I turned to look where she'd pointed. Above the tree line, the northern peak of the Sisters was glowing faintly, not white from snow, but red, like embers under ash. And for the first time, I understood that whatever lived in those mountains wasn't just watching. It was remembering. I didn't sleep. I sat there until dawn, staring at that faint red glow fading into daylight. And when the first light hit the valley, I saw something carved into the dirt near my door, the same symbol I'd seen in the frost on my window, 3 interlocked spirals, each pointing inward. A reminder, or a warning. By morning, I'd stopped pretending I understood what was happening. The world I'd stepped into no longer cared about logic. The only thing that mattered was the rhythm that pulsed beneath those mountains, the one I could feel through my boots, through the air, even through the water when I went to wash my hands by the creek. It wasn't just sound anymore, it was presence. I decided to leave, but something inside me resisted. Every time I started the RV, the engine would turn over, sputter, then die, though it had been running perfectly the day before. I checked the fuel lines, the battery, everything. No problem I could see. Yet each time, the same result. The hum of resistance, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath, refusing to let me go. I spent the morning pacing outside, feeling the fog thicken around me. The world beyond the trees seemed to dissolve, like distance itself was gone. No horizon, no separation, just gray breathing air. That's when I saw it again, the cairn by the creek. Only now, instead of 3 stones, there were 4. The new one was smaller, damp, and still flecked with bits of black soil. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Then the whisper came again. My name. Not from behind me, but inside my head. Soft, tremoring like a thought didn't belong to me. It said, "Listen." The ground gave a faint tremor under my feet, and when I looked toward the mountain light, the snow line above seemed to pulse faintly, as if something beneath was stirring. The fear didn't come in a wave this time. It arrived quietly, like the realization of a truth you already knew but never wanted to admit. I followed the creek. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt like the only thing moving in a place that had stopped breathing. The water grew darker the higher I went, shadowed by pines that leaned closer together, their trunks scarred with long, thin slashes that looked like claw marks. I hiked until the current disappeared underground, a hole in the earth surrounded by moss where the water vanished into darkness. Beside it was a shape, not a body, but something buried. A tarp, half covered in dirt, edges frayed and stiff. My hands shook as I knelt to pull it back, but before I could, the air turned freezing. My breath came out in a thick plume. Then, from behind me, came the sound of bare feet running through the frost. Fast. I spun around. Nothing. But the sound kept moving, circling me, faster and faster, until it stopped dead at my back. I could feel warmth on my neck, breath that wasn't mine. Slowly, I turned. She was there, Mara, standing inches from me, her skin pale and wet, hair tangled with pine needles. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes were wild, black wells that swallowed the reflection of everything around us. Then I realized what she was looking at. Not me, but the ground beneath the tarp. I pulled it back. Inside was a backpack, torn open, the contents scattered, a sketchbook, a rusted camera, a wool jacket still stiff from rain. I picked up the sketchbook. The pages were water-stained, but I could still make out drawings. Mountains, trees, the creek, and then faces. Dozens of faces, each one drawn with hollow eyes. The last page had something written in smudged ink. Open quote, "They watch until you see them. Then they remember your name." Close quote. The hum beneath the earth deepened into a low growl. I dropped the book and stumbled back. The ground trembled, small rocks shifting, water spilling from the hole in uneven pulses. And in that sound I heard voices, not words, but cries, whispers overlapping like hundreds of people calling out at once. I ran. I didn't look back until I reached the RV. The sky had gone the color of slate, the air thick and electric. I threw my bag inside, turned the key, and the engine roared to life instantly. Relief surged through me. I shifted into drive, pressing the pedal hard. The tires spun in the frost, caught traction, and the RV lurched forward down the dirt road. But as I drove, the world began to bend. The road I'd come in on, the same narrow gravel line cutting through the valley, no longer led toward town. It looped back. Every turn brought me closer to the base of the mountain again. I passed my own campsite twice, though the clock on the dash said only minutes had passed. The air smelled faintly of smoke now, dry and acrid. I stopped, stepping out into the open, and that's when I saw them. 3 silhouettes on the ridgeline above, tall, still, impossible against the stormlight. They weren't human, not exactly. Their shapes wavered like heat above fire, yet solid enough to cast shadows that stretched all the way down to where I stood. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body refused. My vision blurred, and the hum became a roar, filling every space, every thought. I fell to my knees. In that sound, I heard something like words, stay, witness, remember. Then everything went silent. When I woke, it was daylight again. My RV sat exactly where it had been the first night, by the creek, untouched. The air was clear, still and warm. The prints, the cairn, the frost, all gone. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamt everything. But when I opened the door to step outside, I saw it, carved deep into the dirt, the same 3 spirals, fresh. I left that valley an hour later. The engine didn't stall again. The road led straight out this time, though I couldn't recall the turns I took. When I reached town, the sky was bright, birds in the trees, people laughing outside a coffee shop, life moving as if nothing had ever happened. But even now, I can still feel it. That hum, low, patient, like something buried under my feet, waiting for acknowledgement. Sometimes, when I park the RV at night and the wind shifts just right, I hear the faint tap, 3 slow knocks somewhere in the distance. And I remember her, Mara, the woman the mountains never released. And I think about how the 3 sisters don't just watch, they keep. They keep those who see too deeply, those who listen when the earth speaks. And if you ever find yourself camping out there, past Sisters, Oregon, where the road turns to gravel and the forest goes still, don't listen for the wind, because it might just be listening for you. My name's Aaron Whitaker. I'm 41 years old, and I've been living on the road in my RV for the past 6 years. I tell myself it's for freedom, for the open spaces, the quiet, the simplicity. But the truth is, it's also an escape. I used to think the danger of RV camping came from broken axles or bad weather, maybe the occasional drunk neighbor at a campground. But after what I've seen in small towns across the country, I've learned that what you should fear most isn't out in the woods. It's the silence that falls after sundown when everyone in town knows something you don't. I remember the first time I pulled into a small town campground that didn't feel right. It was in southern Illinois, a town called Waverly Creek, population maybe 400. The main road was just cracked asphalt winding through empty storefronts, the kind of place that looked like it had surrendered to time. My GPS showed a campsite just outside town, Waverly Pines RV Park. The name sounded peaceful enough. But when I turned onto the gravel road leading there, I could tell the pines weren't the only things watching. There was something about that stretch of road, the way the trees curved overhead like ribs, the way the air thickened the deeper I went. My headlights caught a hand-painted sign half buried in weeds. Campers welcome, no late arrivals. It was barely past 7. The sun had just slipped behind the horizon. But the phrase no late arrivals stuck with me. Who in their right mind puts a curfew on a campground? I should have kept driving. I should have trusted the uneasy twitch in my chest, the one that told me this place wasn't meant for strangers. But when you live on the road long enough, fatigue beats instinct. I told myself people in small towns are just protective, maybe strict about quiet hours. I parked anyway. The campground was small, 10 spots at most. Most looked abandoned. My tires crunched over gravel as I picked a spot under a flickering lamppost. The light buzzed like it was struggling to stay alive, and the air carried the faint, sickly sweet smell of decaying leaves. I hooked up my power line, walked around to check my tires, and that's when I noticed it. Each RV, the few that were still there, had curtains drawn tight, lights out, and something nailed to the wooden posts out front. Not license plates, not reservation tags. They were names, handwritten in faded red ink on wooden slats. Henry, Marla, the Dunns. Names of campers, maybe, but there was something ritualistic about it. I remember standing there trying to rationalize it. Maybe they were just labeling spots for returning guests. But the longer I stared, the more it looked like each sign had been carved, not written, and the wood was darker near the edges, as if it had been burned. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 2 a.m., I woke to what sounded like whispering, faint at first, then sharper, like voices just outside my RV. I froze in bed, holding my breath, straining to listen. It wasn't laughter or conversation. It was a single phrase, repeated softly, the rhythm of it matching the rustle of the pine needles above. Don't open the door. Don't open the door. I sat there for what felt like hours, sweat cooling on my neck, listening. I didn't move. Didn't even reach for my flashlight. When I finally looked toward the window, I saw movement, slow and deliberate, a figure walking past, head low, barefoot on the gravel. They moved from RV to RV, pausing at each one. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt beside my door. Small, bare, like a child's. I left before sunrise, my coffee untouched, my stomach in knots. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Not until months later, when I met another traveler, an older man named Paul, at a rest stop outside Missouri. We swapped stories over gas station coffee, and when I mentioned Waverly Creek, his expression changed completely. He leaned closer, lowered his voice, and said, "You saw the Watchers, didn't you?" That was the first time I heard that word. Watchers. He told me he'd stayed there years earlier, heard the same whispers, but when he tried to leave, his engine wouldn't start until dawn. "They don't like headlights," he said, half joking, but there was no humor in his eyes. He claimed the townsfolk never go near that campground anymore. Something about an old fire, a church that burned down in the woods, and people who still wait for those who wander too close. At first, I dismissed it as folklore, small town superstition. But the road has a way of showing you patterns, and over time, I started to see them. A place in Oklahoma where every camper kept their windows covered with tinfoil. They said it was to block radio interference, but one night I saw light flicker inside one of the trailers. Not from a bulb, but from something glowing in short, pulsing bursts. A ghost town in Nevada with a campground that offered free overnight stays. I took one look at the guest book in the office and saw every entry signed with the same shaky handwriting. And then there was the night in Arkansas, the one that still wakes me up sweating. I'd pulled into a small RV park near a town called Harlow Bend. It looked normal enough. Gravel lots, picnic tables, a small convenience shed that doubled as an office. The owner was a quiet woman in her 60s named Elsie. She told me to pick any spot I liked, but her eyes darted toward the back row when I asked if there were hookups there. "Don't park past the third lamp," she said. Those spots flood. That night the rain started, slow at first, then pounding against the metal roof like fists. I remember lying in bed trying to ignore the wind when I heard it again, that whispering sound. But this time, it wasn't outside. It was beneath me. A hollow voice rising through the floorboards of my RV. I knelt, pressed my ear against the linoleum, and heard what sounded like someone repeating words underwater. Muffled. Urgent. I froze when I caught one clear phrase. "He's back." My flashlight rolled off the counter when I jumped. I grabbed it, swung the beam across the floor. Nothing. But when I stepped outside, rain soaking my clothes, I saw that the last lamp in the row was flickering, the one past where Elsie told me not to park, and someone was standing there, not moving, not hiding, just standing in the rain. I called out, no answer. The shape turned slightly, and the light caught its face just long enough for me to see that it wasn't a person at all. Not really. The skin looked gray, the features wrong, like they'd been copied from memory. I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. When the lightning flashed, it was gone. By morning, my RV tires were sunk in mud. I went to thank Elsie before leaving, but the office door was locked, and through the window I could see the place had been empty for years. Shelves covered in dust, a coffee pot rusted over. That's when I stopped thinking of these experiences as coincidences. The further you get from the cities, the quieter the country becomes. But quiet doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's the sound of something waiting for you to listen. There's a myth among long-term travelers that the smaller the town, the safer it feels. But in my years on the road, I've come to believe the opposite. The smallest towns are where the truth gets buried fastest, where the people don't look at you because they've already decided you won't be staying long enough to matter. Last fall, I stopped in a place called Ashfield, deep in northern Kansas. The weather was turning cold, the wheat fields brittle and dry, wind cutting across the plains like broken glass. I only meant to stay one night. There was a small RV park on the edge of town, 6 lots behind a gas station. The sign said, "Ashfield Welcome Camp, honest rates, no loitering." I laughed at that last part, but it stuck with me later, when I realized that no one in Ashfield wanted you to linger. The woman at the gas station, short hair, smoker's rasp, eyes that never blinked quite long enough, told me I was lucky. "Last spot open," she said. "Most folks don't stay more than a night. When I asked why, she just shrugged. Storms come fast out here. That evening, I set up camp and made dinner inside. The sky outside turned a deep gray purple, the kind that makes the land look flat and endless. I remember stepping out to stretch, and the silence felt heavy, not peaceful, but expectant. There were no crickets, no dogs barking in the distance, not even the sound of wind through the dry grass. Just my own footsteps crunching on gravel. I was about to turn in for the night when I noticed a man standing by the gas pumps across the lot. He wasn't moving, just watching. His silhouette was clear against the last bit of light in the sky. I raised a hand, called out, "Evening." He didn't move, didn't answer. I felt a pulse of unease, that quick, hollow beat of realization that something isn't normal. I went back inside, locked the door, and told myself it was fine. Small-town folks can be strange with outsiders, but around midnight I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a knock, soft, deliberate, coming from the rear of my RV. 3 taps, then silence, then 3 more. I sat up, listening, holding my breath. When it stopped, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, until I heard a voice. It wasn't a whisper. It was a man's voice, low and steady, right outside the window. "Sir, you left your lights on." My heart slammed against my ribs. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. I'd turned everything off before bed. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight, kept it low, crept to the back window, and peeked out through the blinds. No one. Just darkness. But when I turned to glance toward the front, I saw something faint through the windshield. The faint glow of headlights out in the distance, far down the road. 2 beams, and behind them, another set. Then another. Cars. 3 of them. All parked along the road, engines off, lights facing my RV. They stayed there for hours. I watched from inside, too afraid to move. By morning, they were gone. No tracks in the gravel, no tire marks. I went back into town to buy coffee before leaving, and the woman at the counter looked surprised to see me. "You stayed all night?" she asked, her voice half whisper. When I nodded, she just said, "Then you best not stay again." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't have to. I've heard versions of that same warning across states. Different towns, same tone, same fear behind the words. Don't stay again. Like they all knew something they couldn't say. A month later, I met a couple traveling out of Tennessee, Will and Karen, parked next to me at a rest stop in New Mexico. They recognized my rig, said they'd seen it back east, maybe near Missouri. We got to talking about weird campgrounds, and when I mentioned Ashfield, their faces went pale. Karen said they'd stayed there too. Only their story ended differently. They'd arrived late, parked in the same lot, and woke up to find muddy handprints all over their windows. Hundreds of them. Small, child-sized prints, and every one of them faced inward. She said when they asked the sheriff about it, he just told them to leave. No report, no explanation. They did, that same day. We shared stories for hours that night, and when they drove off the next morning, I remember feeling something like gratitude that I wasn't the only one who'd seen it, but also a deeper dread, because if others had too, then maybe it wasn't just me. The scariest thing about these small towns isn't what you see, it's what you start to understand over time. You begin to realize the stories don't contradict each other. They fit, like pieces of a bigger picture you were never meant to see whole. And when you live out here long enough, driving from town to town, that picture starts to form. A map of places that quietly push people away, some for reasons buried under history, old tragedies, fires, floods, others for reasons you can't name, except that something about the land itself feels wrong. The air feels thicker. The light never hits the same way twice. And people there, they don't seem afraid of you, but of what follows you. Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving between towns, I'll see signs that look familiar. A curve of road I swear I've taken before, a field I've passed miles away, and every so often I'll catch sight of another RV in my rearview mirror. Old, rusted, its lights flickering like dying stars. It never passes me, never falls too far behind, just keeps its distance, shadowing me until sunrise. I've stopped looking at it now, because the one time I did, really looked, I thought I saw my own reflection in its windshield, and it was smiling. These stories I tell aren't to frighten people from the road. They're to remind you that freedom has a cost. When you live untethered, you're exposed to the places most people pass without noticing, the quiet corners where the world folds in on itself. And if you ever find yourself camping in a small town where the streets empty too early and the locals stop talking when you walk in, remember this: don't ignore the signs. Don't chase the truth after dark. And if someone tells you not to stay the night, believe them, because every small town has something they're keeping buried. And sometimes what's buried doesn't want to stay that way. There was one town that changed everything for me. The one that finally made me stop chasing stories and start warning others. It was in northern Arizona, a place called Dry Creek Hollow. Population sign read 87, but I didn't see more than a dozen souls the whole time I was there. It sat at the end of a 2-lane road, hemmed in by red cliffs and desert brush that swallowed sound. I'd been driving 12 hours straight, running from another sleepless night in Oklahoma, and when I saw the sign for Dry Creek RV Park, first night free, I pulled in without thinking. The office was a single trailer with faded curtains. The register book was open, pen still resting in the spine. Nobody inside. I signed my name anyway. Aaron Whitaker, Lot 6. The air smelled like dust and something faintly metallic like blood or rust. The sun was setting behind the cliffs, painting everything in bruised orange and purple. Lot 6 sat near a dried riverbed. The earth there was cracked like reptile skin, and in the distance I could see what looked like the remains of old camper shells half buried in sand. I assumed they'd been dumped there long ago, stripped for parts. But the way they faced, all turned toward the cliffs, gave me pause. That night, the wind came in hard. It rattled my awning, whistled through the seams of the windows. Around midnight, I heard something hit the side of my RV, a sharp, deliberate tap. I turned on the outside light and saw nothing but dust blowing through the air. Then, another tap, from the other side. I stepped out with my flashlight and swept the beam across the dirt. Footprints, bare, wide, as if whoever made them dragged their feet slightly. They circled my RV once, then disappeared toward the cliffs. I should have left, but exhaustion does strange things to judgment. I told myself it was the wind, maybe a stray animal. I went back inside, locked every latch, and sat in the driver's seat until dawn, hand on the ignition. When daylight came, I finally saw what I'd missed before. All around the campground, shallow depressions in the sand, dozens of them. Human-shaped like something had lain down and vanished into the earth. I walked out toward one of the old camper shells and found a pattern scorched into the dirt beneath it, a spiral blackened like lightning glass. I left within the hour. 2 days later, I stopped in a larger town to refill gas and check my tires. The attendant looked at the dust on my rig and asked where I'd come from. When I told him Dry Creek Hollow, he went silent, then said quietly, "That park's been closed for 15 years. You sure you didn't mean Dry Creek Junction?" But I hadn't. I still had the receipt slip I'd torn from the register, dated that same night. I never did find Dry Creek Hollow again on a map. I've thought a lot about why these stories happen in small towns. Maybe it's the isolation. Maybe it's what people choose not to talk about, what they build over instead of digging up. Maybe it's simpler. Maybe they're just places this country never meant to be lived in. You start to notice a pattern in the silence, the same way you notice wind shifting before a storm, a strange radio hum on certain nights, dogs that refuse to bark, locals who warn you off with that polite but hollow smile like they've already buried too many explanations. There's a reason why so many of us who live on the road talk about the bad campgrounds, not because of poor amenities or rough roads, but because they change you. They strip something from you while you're not looking. After Dry Creek, I kept moving west, convinced I could outdrive whatever followed. But fear doesn't stay in one place. It travels in the empty miles between gas stations, in the spaces of static between radio stations, where you swear you can hear someone breathing. Sometimes I wake up to find my GPS marking places I never entered. Sometimes I see names on campground posts that match people I haven't met yet, but will. And then sometimes when I pass through another forgotten town with a diner and a shuttered schoolhouse, I feel that same quiet welcome. The kind that means you've been here before, even if you don't remember. I've learned to listen now, to the creak of the power lines, to the hum of the vending machine lights outside an empty gas station, to the wind whispering through the narrow roads where no one else drives after dark. Because sometimes those sounds aren't warnings, they're invitations. And if you've been on the road long enough, you know that invitations from small towns come with a price. I tell my story not because I want to scare people away from RV camping, but because I want them to understand something deeper, something that saved my life. Fear isn't the enemy. Ignoring it is. If your gut tells you to keep driving, keep driving. If you see a sign that says no late arrivals, respect it. If the locals stop talking when you walk in, leave your food, pay your bill, and don't look back. The road offers freedom, but freedom doesn't mean safety. Sometimes it means you're finally close enough to the things the rest of the world forgot to name. And sometimes in those small, quiet towns, the people don't want to hurt you. They just don't want you to wake whatever they've learned to live beside. So when you find yourself parked under a lone streetlight, gravel whispering under your tires, and the night feels like it's breathing with you, remember this story. Remember the towns that don't appear on maps. Remember the faces that never blink long enough. Remember the voices that tell you in a calm, tired tone, don't stay again. Because somewhere out there, another traveler is pulling in, engine humming, unaware of the names carved into the posts, names that might include yours next. And I hope when they hear this story, they'll understand what I didn't. Some roads don't lead out, they just loop quietly until you forget why you started. So be careful where you camp, and never mistake quiet for safety, because in small towns across this country, the darkness isn't empty, it's occupied.